Okay, in this portion of the example, we're going to look at how to use SPSS to create a frequency distribution. And let's start by bringing in our data. So if we go to the File pull-down menu, and we go to Open Data, we can just find our data set, which I'm putting in a folder called GSS. So I'm going to bring in my 2012 GSS data. So again, notice that I have all of my variables here, all of my records. And if I want to create a frequency distribution, let's say I wanted to do it for the variable education, I would just go to the Analyze pull-down menu, go to Descriptive Statistics, and then Frequencies. And then I just have to find my variable. I can just type in educ, highlight it, move it over to this box using this little arrow. And I have to make sure that this little check mark next to Display Frequency Tables is marked. If it's not marked, SPSS is not going to create a frequency table. So make sure that there's a check mark in this box. And we'll click OK. And in short order, SPSS creates our output statistics. And so we can start with basically a summary of the number of cases that are used in the analysis. So we see that we have 1,972 valid cases. Valid cases basically means that there's no missing data. And that's our N, our number of cases. And then we have 2 missing cases. And so down here, this is our actual univariate table. And so you can see that these are the values of education. And it goes from 0 all the way down to 20 years of education. Then we also have some that are missing because they don't know or they're not applicable, for a total of 2 missing cases. The grand total is 1,974. And in these different columns, SPSS has the frequency distribution, the percent distribution, the valid percent distribution, and the cumulative percent distribution. So what is the difference between percent and valid percent? Well, valid percent basically takes into account only those cases that are non-missing. And so percent uses in its denominator both the missing cases and the non-missing cases. Valid percent only looks at those cases that are non-missing. And so when we're looking at percentages, really what we care about is the valid percent rather than the percent. And so how do we read these? Well, first of all, let's look at those people who have 0 years of education. And so there's 3 people in the data set out of the 1,970 some that we have included. And they make up about 0.2%. Okay, they also make up a cumulative percent that's the same as their valid percent, right? And so cumulative percent, remember, is just a running total. It tells us the relative position of a particular value of the variable in the distribution. And so let's see if we can see some patterns. So first of all, we can see that there's quite a wide range in education. So the low value is 0. The high value is 20. It looks like there are more cases that have high levels of education rather than low levels of education. So as a group, this is a fairly educated sample. We can see that if we look at the cumulative percent column, the midpoint is about 13 years of education. We can see some evidence of some peaks in the data. So we see that there's like 540 cases that have 12 years of education. That seems to be a peak because it's much higher than 11, much higher than 13. There looks like another peak at 14 years, another peak at 16 years. Looks like a slightly smaller peak at 18 years. These probably correspond to terminal degrees like high school, associate's degree, college degree, master's degree, and so on. And so there's a number of different patterns that we can find by looking at the data. And so this is basically a good starting point for analysis. And so we can very easily create a frequency table in SPSS, and we can use that as the basis for some of the first statistics that we're going to do when we're looking at some kind of a research project.